El-Farouk Khaki is a refugee and immigration lawyer who works tirelessly in the Muslim community to promote gender equality and human rights. He is the founder of Salam Canada, which is a queer Muslim group that fights for social justice. It is also a support group for practicing and non-practicing queer Muslims. It is my pleasure to welcome El-Farouk Khaki to Studio 4 to tell us more. A brave man you are.
One has to do what one has to do.
Apparently. Now, I'm assuming because it says on your website, on the website, that it's okay to say queer.
Yes.
Means inclusive?
Yeah, it depends on who's saying it and what context it is.
I'm sure.
Right? Yeah. Just had this long conversation with somebody, actually another interview that I did a couple of weeks ago, where the interviewer was asking, why would you choose a word like that, right? But it's about conformity. Queer is a neutral word, traditionally meaning something that's different, something that's odd, if you will. As thought being different or odd is a bad thing, and maybe it's not a bad thing. So I think taking it on puts a different sort of light that conformity is not always a good thing.
Right, as my grandmother always said, you know, you're just special.
Yes.
You're not queer or odd, you're just special.
We're all special.
You go, okay, we're all special by our very nature alone. When did you know you were not straight?
I guess when I hit puberty, about 11, 12, 13 years of age, you know. I think many people come to that realization as their sexuality starts to manifest, as to which way it's manifesting. I would suspect that there were signs and other things before I became aware of it in terms of being queer or being nonconformist. But not everybody who's queer is nonconformist either. So
exactly. But who did you tell? How did you tell them?
I didn't tell anybody. I thought it would go away. I hoped and prayed it would go away. I grew up in a faith tradition. I grew up in a family that was very loving and quite liberal, but you know, the dialogue even in Canada 30 some odd years ago was different, and our understanding of gender and of sexual orientation was different even as Canadian society, forget within a particular faith tradition or not. So I didn't tell anybody. I hoped it would go away. It didn't. I prayed it would. It didn't. And so I struggled with it, and I wrestled with it, and I hid it, and I denied it, and it was a slow process of coming out to some people and not coming out to others, and sort of leading, I wouldn't say necessarily double lives, but multiple social realities.
Yes. Well, as you know so well, in certain countries, in certain Muslim countries for sure, Iran, Saudi, Yemen, it's homosexuality punishable by death.
Yes. In many societies, and not just Muslim societies as well, because if you look at societies like Jamaica, for example, or Uganda, and Uganda is not a Muslim majority society. Muslims make up only a very small minority, and yet they have legislation that's being put forward that talks about the death penalty for people engaged in same-sex activities.
In Russia.
And Russia. A lot of times it's not the actual laws that censor people, it's how the laws are used, or it's the other tools of social control. So vagrancy laws or loitering laws or public morality laws are used, and they're used differentially against certain kinds of people to control them.
Why did you start Salam Canada?
When I first started to become aware of my own sexuality and being aware of sort of traditional interpretations of Islam that weren't exactly queer friendly, I thought I was alone. I knew intellectually that I wasn't, but I didn't have a community or a support network of others like me. And so that was very isolating on many levels. When I moved from Vancouver, which is where I grew up, to Toronto, I started to meet other people who were Muslim identified and were also queer identified. And I came to understand that, yes, this wasn't just an intellectual thing, but that there actually were other people like me. And we had a lot of similar issues around our family, around integration, around racism or xenophobia within queer communities or within larger Canadian society, and how did we negotiate these multiple identities where we weren't fully accepted for who we were in any of these sort of different layers of our identities. And so Salam was born out of my desire to find a place where we could be authentic to ourselves and embrace the fullness of who we were.
Founded in 91?
In 91.
In 91. How has it grown? How has it changed?
Well, when I started it in '91, I called it a social support group for lesbian and gay Muslims. And it was very specific that it was social and it was support. And it was only lesbian and gay because bisexuals and transgender people weren't even part of our larger narrative. Right. And I shut the organization down in 1993. There was a bunch of different things happening in my life, and there were some threats that came out as a result of an article that I and some other members of Salam wrote for a university newspaper in Toronto. And so with all
threats, death threats?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Those.
Yeah, moving on. And
no kidding.
And there was a lot of stuff happening, and with all of that, and a lot of people, we used to get over 100 people back in 1992 to come to our events. Even people were coming from the United States because they didn't have anything similar. But nobody wanted to do the work. Everybody thought that El-Farouk would do it, that he had no issues, that he had no coming out issues or any other sort of personal family, that sort of stuff. Right. And that's just not true. So everybody had great ideas as to what I should do, but nobody actually wanted to pick up the torch and run with it.
Sure, you needed a team.
Yeah.
As all good organizations do.
Absolutely. One person does not a movement make. And so I thought at that time, this is not the right time. This is not, maybe this needs to sit and this needs to wait. And so I closed it down in 1993, and then it was reborn again in 1998, at the end of '98, but as Al-Fatiha, as somebody in the United States who learned about us and tried to pick it up and go with it, but by that time we had closed, and so this gave birth to Al-Fatiha that rebirthed a queer community in Toronto and in Vancouver. And then eventually we became Salam Canada, sort of embracing our national identity.
Right. Do you study things like the Quran, to study the passages? And I know you studied the Quran, but do you know what I mean? As people who study the Bible will say, in the Bible it says homosexuality is a sin, and then somebody else will study the Bible and say, no, it just says. Yes. What about in the Quran?
Well, I think the same kind of discourse exists within Islam. Some of it is nascent. I mean, I think that the context of interpretation also has to be seen in light of colonialism, underdevelopment, and transnationalism, and how globalism and corporate globalism affects the world. Your previous speaker was talking about global economies and so on, and the impact that it has on race, on class, on economic development, and how that also influences power structures, and religion is often about power structures. So
you noticed.
Yes, I did. And so if you change the base, hopefully you change the structures, right? So in terms of coming back to your question, yes, I read my Quran, and I've gone to it as my source. And there are other people who are more learned and who have gone through a systemic education process. And that some of these people are going to be at the conference that we're having.
Islamic scholars.
They are scholars, yes.
What about imams?
There are 2 out gay imams.
2?
Yes, one in Washington, D.C. and one in South Africa. There are others who are not out. And there are others who I would consider imams, but who don't carry that label or that title.
And some, I'm sure, who are studying to be imams, who will eventually come out and be part of the movement to say compassionate God in Christianity, in Islam, in Allah, Jesus.
Absolutely. I mean,
Buddha, compassionate.
That discourse exists in every faith tradition, right? And at the core of it, every faith tradition talks about how we can all be better human beings and how we can live with others in the world and and move through it. So that discourse, I think, exists everywhere, whether it's highlighted and how it's positioned within the larger context of the community. And sometimes when we talk about Islam, as opposed to, let's say, as Westerners, Christianity, we also need to understand where the discourse began and how it began, and the fact that a lot of Muslims, for example, live in a part of the world where the day-to-day realities of feeding yourself and getting an education are the greater challenge.
Of course. Did much change after 9/11 or with the death of bin Laden or any of that when you look at extremists, the fundamentalists, the really bad side?
9/11,
did it change for your organization?
9/11 was a catalyst. You know, it was this horrible thing that happened, but what it did is it forced many people to come out of what I call their Muslim closet. Many of us who had been sort of disenfranchised by the popular manifestations within Muslim communities or by Muslim organizations of a particular form of interpretation or a particular form of conservatism, who had sort of left and it's, would maybe go in for the Eids or only go in occasionally or so on. And not necessarily that these people were not believers or non-practicing, but who just didn't sort of fit into that mold or that public persona that was being projected, came out of the closet and said, wait, I'm Muslim too. This is not my Islam. And so what it did is it gave impetus to a movement that had already started. And some people call it the progressive Muslim movement. I'm not too fond of the word progressive because it implies a certain arrogance, I guess. But I mean, the work that I do is about creating inclusive communities where we can celebrate our humanities, right?
Sure. Interfaith or inclusive?
Both. Because, Muslims don't live in isolation. We have, my partner's family is not Muslim. And so my mother-in-law is not Muslim, but she'll come to the mosque with us when she comes to visit us in Toronto. So to me, the Muslim community is inclusive of non-Muslims, and it's inclusive of a whole variety and diversity of interpretations. Muslims are not a monolith. 1.5 billion Muslims don't all think and believe in exactly the same way. And it's a lie that's perpetuated by some people on the inside and a lie that's perpetuated by some people from the outside.
Of course, and as you know, post 9/11, there were some very naive people thinking all Muslims must be extremists.
It's not just after 9/11.
Or before that,
it continues,
perhaps.
and it still continues.
Yes.